You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Disease du Jour podcast. In today's episode, I spoke with Dr. Alina Vale about equine welfare assessments at equestrian facilities and training centers, and specifically at racetracks. I'm your host, Carly Sisson, digital editor of Equine Management. The Disease du Jour podcast is brought to you in 2024 by Merck Animal Health. Dr. Alina Vale attended veterinary school at the University of California, Davis, and earned a master's degree in veterinary forensic medicine from the University of Florida. As an official veterinarian with the California Horse Racing Board, she investigates equine fatalities and conducts postmortem examination reviews. A passionate proponent of the humane use of horses, Dr. Vale previously chaired the AAEP Welfare and Public Policy Advisory Council, as well as the Equine Abuse and Neglect Subcommittee. Thank you, Dr. Vale, for joining us today.
Thank you, Carly. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with you. Obviously, we just had the Kentucky Derby. I think this is a really timely conversation. Do you want to get us started by just explaining a little bit more about your background? How did you become interested and involved in regulatory veterinary medicine?
Certainly. I grew up endurance riding and participating in Pony Club. And I actually thought racing was cruel when I was younger because that is what I heard. I lived 15 minutes from the Del Mar racetrack, but never visited until I became a vet student and volunteered for research projects on racehorses and got to shadow a friend who worked for a very well-known trainer and meet his veterinarians. And that really shifted my perspective of the industry and the way the horses were cared for. So I decided to devote my career to racehorses because I thought these were the horses that were really pushed to the extreme, pushed to the limits. So I completed a hospital internship in Lexington after graduating from UC Davis. I spent 2 years in Dubai and then returned to Southern California and worked for a racetrack practice. I had a short stint in the veterinary pharmaceutical industry and also got certified in acupuncture because I realized that we needed to decrease our dependence on pharmaceuticals and joint injections to keep our athletes sound. I completed a master's degree in veterinary forensic medicine, and this was to better understand the line between the humane use of horses and the abuse of horses. So since then, I've worked various part-time jobs in regulatory roles, helping organizations develop novel drug testing programs. And then in 2019, when public concern about fatalities at Santa Anita Racetrack really hit a turning point, I then became an official veterinarian for the California Horse Racing Board.
Yeah, I think you just bring so much great educational experience and real frontline experience to this topic. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what exactly the regulatory veterinarian's role is at racetracks and events, and how does this differ from the attending veterinarian? How closely do those two work together?
Certainly. So historically, the regulatory racetrack veterinarian's job focused on a hands-on pre-race exam the morning of the race, monitoring horses while racing, and then completing post-race drug testing. Now, these roles have greatly expanded since 2019, and that summer I was monitoring veterinarian, and so I watched horses train during the morning training hours. We also developed an entry panel in California, and this was comprised of regulatory veterinarians and racing stewards that would scrutinize each horse's medical records, training and racing records, and then we could watch horses in the mornings prior to race day. And so this would give us additional opportunities to really scrutinize any horses that had any potential concerns or red flags. We've increased the out-of-competition drug testing, and there's more regulatory veterinarians observing horses during the warm-up and during the races themselves. We can even require advanced diagnostic imaging if we have any concerns about a horse prior to allowing it to perform high-speed training or racing. And then fatality reviews have been the focus of mine for the past several years. These are regulatory veterinarian roles. We also have private or attending veterinarians that are performing the daily care of racehorses on the backside of the racetrack. And ideally, we have a very close and trusting relationship to work together and help horses that may be at increased risk for injury. So we should be able to reach out to each other, express any concerns, and protect each other so that we can maintain that strong relationship.
And just because you've mentioned 2019 a couple of times now, do you want to just give a brief explanation of what happened that year that made some of these changes occur?
Yes. So the public became very concerned about a cluster of racehorse fatalities at Santa Anita Park in Southern California, and it didn't become just a problem for us here in California. It really sparked concern across the US and even internationally. And so racehorse injuries and fatalities became a turning point on the future of the industry. And so not only here in California did we make significant changes to improve racehorse safety and welfare, but there was a ripple effect. And so other jurisdictions similarly became aware and concerned in order to protect the horses and protect the industry.
Today's Disease Du Jour podcast is brought to you by Prestige Vaccines from Merck Animal Health. Raise your standard in equine vaccines with Prestige. From a worldwide leader in vaccine manufacturing and innovation, the Prestige line has an enduring reputation of performance. Known for their safety and efficacy, only Prestige vaccines are backed by the Merck Animal Health Respiratory Biosurveillance Program, which helps practitioners create new standards of care and improved infectious respiratory disease management. Learn more at merckanimalhealthusa.com. What are some of the daily protocols that are now in place at the tracks to protect racehorses? And what are some of the protocols that are in place when a horse dies? I know that's an area that you've really specialized in.
Yes. Well, the role of the private veterinarians has changed in many jurisdictions. They now are certifying that a horse is fit to work and fit to race. Whereas previously, some racehorse trainers might have only used their private veterinarian to examine a horse that was having a problem, a lame horse. Now the private veterinarian is examining every horse at the track on a regular basis. And this time investment is significant, but worthwhile, as they can then diagnose minor injuries before they become major injuries. And there is an inherent risk of racing and training horses at speed. And so we unfortunately do still have catastrophic injuries and fatalities at the racetrack. We are trying to learn as much as we can from every tragic situation. And we've had a necropsy program here in California for over 30 years. And a necropsy is an animal autopsy or postmortem exam. And so that's been standard, but it was a few years ago that we developed the fatality review program and made that a regulation. And again, that's been the focus of mine for the past several years. And that's where I look at the horse's medical records, training records, racing records, of course, that postmortem necropsy exam. And then I meet with the trainer and speak with their attending veterinarian. And I think, again, if we can give the trainer a safe place to reflect back and maybe see any red flags in the horse's history, looking at the postmortem exam, sometimes we can find pre-existing lesions or changes in the bone that indicated stress remodeling or stress fractures that weren't always obvious to the trainer and attending veterinarian clinically. We can learn, develop an understanding of these injuries, and hopefully all work together to prevent future injuries.
Yeah, it seems like those exams have really had an impact on improving welfare in the industry specifically. So that's really exciting. I know you speak a lot about like the specific regulations in California, and obviously every state is different, but are there any efforts that are being made to standardize welfare regulations across the country or even within other countries that might, ship racehorses into America and vice versa?
Yes, certainly. So several years ago, the Horse Racing and Safety Authority was created. And THISA, the Horse Racing and Safety Authority's acronym, safety in racing means three things. Are there any substances in a horse that shouldn't be there? So that's the anti-doping and medication control program. Second is the racetrack surface in optimal condition. And third, are the horses fit to run? And so that falls in the veterinary protocols and also data collection and analysis. And so that's really changed the way racing is in the United States now. Instead of just relying on each state, each racing jurisdiction to have their own set of rules and protocols, we're now trying to have a uniform program here in the United States. And of course, working with colleagues in other countries and jurisdictions around the world is very important. I'm part of an international subcommittee, and we're looking to harmonize racehorse injury and fatality reporting. And ideally, we'll be able to compare injuries in different jurisdictions, find correlations that maybe point us towards associations that we can use to prevent certain types of injuries if we notice certain trends and variables between us.
That's great. I know so many improvements have been made in so many areas, but are there any areas that you believe more regulations are necessary to improve welfare? Any areas you're specifically interested in looking into further?
I personally do not believe that the riding crop or whip should be used to encourage a fatigued horse to run faster, and that differs from many other opinions in the racing industry right now. But when I see that so many of our horses have pre-existing lesions that we're not aware of because they're so subtle, and the horse doesn't always show us an obvious lameness, especially because some of these pre-existing lesions can be in two legs, both front legs or both hind legs, I think it's a real dangerous zone if the only sign that a horse is showing us is fatigue and not performing as well as expected. I think we should respect that and not push that individual horse past its limits. So I do believe that experienced and careful riders can certainly maximize a horse's performance with other skills and with other riders' aids. I just think that we should be very cautious about the current protocol of allowing the whip to be used to encourage a fatigued horse. Certainly, HISA has strict regulations on how the riding crop, the whip, can be used. But I think in the future, I hope that is even more further limited.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the more controversial topics that comes up with racing in general across the board. So yeah, it's interesting to see what happens there. I'm really curious to hear more about what you're working on next in your career to improve welfare across the industry, if you have any additional areas of interest. I know we've talked offline a little bit about creating assessment protocols, if you want to speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so of course, regulations are very important in the equine industry, but regulations only take us so far. If we're forcing a trainer or a facility or organization to make changes, that's very different than them wanting to make the changes. They digging in to their values and wanting to improve equine welfare. And so I've been brainstorming the idea of a humane or welfare certification. And you can see this in other uses of animals. When you go to the grocery store and you see cage-free eggs or pasture-raised beef as advertising for the food that you purchase. And so consumers have the opportunity to vote with their pocketbook to choose brands that resonate with their values. And I am a passionate proponent of the humane use of horses and would love to help like-minded individuals and groups spread their good work through a equine welfare assessment program. And I don't know what this will look like yet, but I have drawn inspiration from other organizations, some I've had the opportunity to collaborate and be involved with. If you've ever watched the credits at the end of a movie that had animals in it, you'll see American Humane's "No Animals Were Harmed" in the making of this movie. And so they have a Humane Hollywood program, and horses are a very popular animal to have in movies. And so they have very strict regulations for horses and other animals used in this part of the entertainment industry. Also, the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, it's an accreditation body that focuses on the aftercare of thoroughbreds. And then there's another Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries program. which accredits and recognizes sanctuaries and rescue centers. So this isn't a novel idea of having an equine welfare assessment program that, again, trainers or facilities or organizations could opt into versus being forced to make these changes. So I'm excited to see where this endeavor leads.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And I think there's been so much discussion about welfare in every equine discipline recently on social media. And I think it's great to see that there's very much action being taken to sort of help improve things as much as possible. But it's been really exciting to hear about your work and to learn more about, what veterinarians are doing to make sure that racing and other disciplines are safe for the horses. Do you have anything else you want to add on the topic before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much, Chloe, for the opportunity to speak. And I look forward to reconnecting once I have a new program to promote. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll love to hear more about that when the time comes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Vale, for joining us on this episode. And thank you to our audience for listening. And a very special thank you to our sponsor, Merck Animal Health. If you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, please send me an email at csisson@equinenetwork.com. That's CSISSON@equinenetwork.com.